Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. It was a Saturday morning when my phone rang. I was in the middle of making coffee, still shaking off the grogginess of sleep. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me told me to pick up. Mr. Antonio De Luca, a woman's voice asked, clinical and steady. Speaking, I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder. This is Nurse Langston from St. Mary's Hospital. Your wife, Rachel Sinclair, has been in a car accident. She's in critical condition. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the counter. What happened? Is she? I couldn't finish the sentence. She's stable, but it's serious. You should come immediately. I didn't remember the drive to the hospital, just the tightness in my chest and the questions racing through my mind. Rachel had been distant lately, but I'd chalked it up to work stress or something I wasn't doing right. Now, all those little signs I'd ignored felt like red flags slapping me in the face. When I arrived, a doctor filled me in. Rachel had suffered a traumatic brain injury and was in a medically induced coma. They weren't sure when, or if, she would wake up. As I sat by her bedside, looking at her pale face, I felt a rush of emotions. Fear, sadness, guilt. I held her hand, brushing my thumb over her wedding ring. I couldn't lose her. Whatever had been going on, I told myself we'd fix it. We had to. But that was before everything unraveled. The hours at the hospital stretched into days. I sat by Rachel's side, watching the machines hum and beep, whispering words she couldn't hear. Nurses came and went, offering updates and polite smiles. My world shrank to that sterile room, her pale face, and the faint hope she'd open her eyes. Then came the paperwork. Mr. De Luca? A nurse approached with a folder. We need your signature for some forms. It's about her medical history and next steps. I took the pen, flipping through the pages, scanning the jargon. Then I saw it, a note under surgical history. 2 words jumped out, tubal ligation. My brain froze. That couldn't be right. Rachel and I had been planning to start a family. We'd spent countless nights talking about names, debating whether to paint the nursery yellow or green. A tubal ligation meant she couldn't have children, ever. I called the nurse back. There's a mistake, I said, my voice tight. This says she had a tubal ligation. That's not possible. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the file. It's in her records. Done about a year ago. I felt like the ground had opened beneath me. A year ago? That meant she had made this decision and never told me. Every conversation about our future, every promise we'd made, it was all a lie. But it didn't stop there. The next line made my chest tighten even more. Pregnancy termination. I stared at the words until they blurred. My wife had been pregnant? When? And why hadn't she told me? My hands shook as I closed the folder, the questions piling up faster than I could process them. I needed answers, but Rachel couldn't give them to me. Not yet. So I sat there, staring at her lifeless form, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't sure I wanted her to wake up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hospital chair, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, searching for the signs I'd missed. Rachel had always been guarded, never secretive, or so I thought. She liked to handle things herself, brushing off my concerns with a smile or a kiss. I'd taken that independence as strength. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I asked to see her primary doctor. I told myself it was about understanding her care plan, but deep down, I was searching for something, anything, to make sense of what I'd seen in that folder. Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, walked me into his office. He gestured for me to sit, but I couldn't. My legs felt too restless, my mind too scattered. I have questions about my wife's medical history, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. There are things I wasn't aware of. Dr. Patel's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Of course. What specifically would you like to know? I hesitated, unsure how much he could legally share. The surgery, her tubal ligation, and the pregnancy termination. He nodded, leaning back in his chair. Both procedures were elective. The termination was about a year and a half ago, and the tubal ligation followed several months later. She made it clear these were personal decisions. Personal decisions. The phrase hit me like a slap. Personal decisions that excluded me entirely. Did she say why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel sighed. I can't disclose everything, but she was under considerable emotional stress at the time. She mentioned wanting to take control of her life and her future. I left his office in a daze, his words echoing in my head. Emotional stress? What kind of stress could have driven her to end a pregnancy and permanently close the door to the family we dreamed of? When I got back to Rachel's room, Ava, her younger sister, was there. She stood by the bed, holding Rachel's hand and whispering to her, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Antonio," she said softly when she saw me. "How are you holding up?" I wanted to scream at her, demand to know if she'd known about Rachel's choices. Instead, I said, "I'm doing my best." Ava nodded, her eyes darting away. Something about her body language felt off, like she was carrying a secret. "Ava," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Did Rachel ever talk to you about anything? Anything she didn't tell me?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "What do you mean?" "She had a tubal ligation," I blurted out. "And a pregnancy termination. Did you know?" Ava's face went white. She stumbled back a step, looking like she'd been caught in a lie. I didn't. "Antonio, this isn't the time," she stammered. My heart sank. That was all the confirmation I needed. Ava knew something, and she wasn't telling me. "You knew," I said, my voice rising. "You knew, and you didn't say anything to me?" "Her husband." Ava looked like she wanted to crawl out of her skin. "It wasn't my place. Rachel said she'd tell you when she was ready." "When she was ready?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "She made these decisions behind my back, and you just went along with it?" Ava's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't agree with what she did, okay? But Rachel was going through a lot, and I was trying to be supportive." I stared at her, a mix of anger and despair churning in my chest. What was she going through, Ava? What could possibly justify this? She hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't, Antonio. It's not my story to tell." I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "She's lying in that bed. Comatose. If you don't tell me, I may never know." Ava looked at me, her tears spilling over. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, shaking her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered before rushing out of the room. I was left alone with Rachel, her still form mocking me with its silence. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built my life around, had been hiding an entire other life from me. And I was only beginning to unravel the truth. Ava's reaction wouldn't leave my head. Her refusal to tell me the truth felt like a wall I couldn't break through. I stayed by Rachel's side for hours, watching her chest rise and fall with the rhythm of the ventilator. Her silence was deafening, her secrets hanging between us like a ghost. By the third day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. If Ava wouldn't talk, maybe someone else would. I called Rachel's closest friend, Beth. Beth and Rachel had been inseparable since college. If anyone knew what Rachel had been hiding, it would be her. The phone rang a few times before Beth picked up. "Antonio," she said, surprised. "How's Rachel? Is she?" "She's stable," I cut in, my voice flat. "Beth, I need to ask you something. Did Rachel ever tell you about the pregnancy she terminated?" There was a long pause. I could hear Beth breathing on the other end, each second twisting the knot in my chest tighter. She didn't tell you?" Beth finally asked, her voice trembling. "No," I said sharply. "I had no idea. And now I find out she had a tubal ligation too. Beth, I need to know what's going on. Did she tell you why she did it?" Beth hesitated again, and I could feel my patience snapping. "Beth," I said firmly, "please. I deserve to know the truth." "She was scared," Beth admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Antonio, I don't know if I should be the one to say this." "You're already saying it," I pressed. "Just tell me." Beth took a deep breath. "Rachel had an affair." My stomach dropped. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of my lungs. "Who?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "It was Adam," Beth said reluctantly. "Adam Sinclair. Her high school boyfriend. Adam." The name brought a flood of memories. Rachel had mentioned him a few times early in our relationship, always with a nostalgic smile. I dismissed him as a relic of her past, someone she'd outgrown. The thought of him being part of her present, our present, made me feel physically sick. How long? I asked through gritted teeth. About 2 years, Beth said. It ended months ago though. She said she broke it off for good. 2 years, I repeated, my voice hollow. That meant our last anniversary, our vacations, our late-night talks, all of it had been shadowed by her betrayal. She told me about the pregnancy, Beth continued, her tone cautious. It wasn't yours, Antonio. That's why she terminated it. She couldn't keep it. Not when it would expose her affair, I finished bitterly. Beth was silent, and I knew I was right. Why the tubal ligation? I asked, my voice raw. She felt trapped, Beth said. Adam pushed her to leave you. He wanted her to have the baby, to start over with him. But Rachel didn't want that. She wanted to fix things with you, to put it all behind her. She thought if she couldn't have kids, there'd be no risk of another mistake. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. The room spun around me as the weight of her decisions crushed me. She hadn't just lied to me, she destroyed the foundation of our marriage. I'm sorry, Antonio, Beth said softly. I should have told you. But Rachel begged me not to. She said she'd tell you herself. She never did, I said bitterly, staring at Rachel through the window of her room. And now she might never get the chance. Beth stayed quiet, and I hung up without saying goodbye. The phone slipped from my hand as I leaned forward, my head in my hands. The love of my life had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. As I sat there, drowning in the truth, a nurse walked up to me. Mr. DeLuca, she said, hesitant. I think you should know, we've just been informed that Adam Sinclair passed away this morning. It looks like a suspected overdose. Her words barely registered, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Adam's death added a new layer of mystery to the tangled mess Rachel had left behind. What else was I about to uncover? Adam Sinclair's death felt like the universe tossing gasoline onto a fire that was already out of control. As the nurse walked away, her words kept repeating in my head, suspected overdose. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than a tragic accident. Adam's sudden death, Rachel's secrets, it was all too much to be a coincidence. The hospital felt suffocating, so I stepped outside for air. The cold January wind bit through my jacket, but it didn't clear my mind. If anything, it made the chaos in my head sharper, more real. I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was lying in that bed, hooked up to machines. I pulled out my phone and Googled Adam Sinclair. Sure enough, there it was, local business owner found dead in apparent overdose. The article was sparse on details, but mentioned he'd been found in his home by a neighbor. It said nothing about Rachel, nothing to tie him to the mess unraveling in my life. But I knew better. Before I could spiral further, my phone buzzed. It was Ava. I need to talk to you, she said as soon as I answered. Her voice was tight, like she'd been crying. Then talk, I said, harsher than I intended. Not over the phone, she insisted. Can you meet me at my place? Please. I hesitated. I wasn't sure how much more I could take, but the desperation in her voice left me no choice. I'll be there in 20, I said and hung up. When Ava opened the door, her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She didn't say a word, just stepped aside to let me in. Her apartment was eerily quiet, the weight of whatever she was about to say hanging in the air. She gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. What's this about, Ava? She wrung her hands, pacing the room. I shouldn't be telling you this, she started, but after Adam, after what happened this morning, I can't keep it in anymore. Then don't, I snapped. Just say it. Ava flinched but nodded. Adam was threatening Rachel. What? My voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. He wouldn't leave her alone, Ava said, her words tumbling out in a rush. After she ended the affair, he kept calling, showing up at her work, at her gym. He was obsessed. She told me he said he'd ruin her life if she didn't come back to him. Ruin her life how? I demanded, my heart pounding. Ava hesitated. He knew things. About her, about you. Things she didn't want getting out. What kind of things, Ava? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. He recorded them, Antonio. Their encounters. I staggered back as if she'd punched me. The humiliation, the betrayal, it was all too much. You knew this. She told me in confidence, Ava said, tears streaming down her face. She was terrified. She thought if you found out, you'd leave her. And she was trying to make it right. She swore she'd never see him again. But he wouldn't let her go, I said, the realization dawning on me. Ava nodded. I don't know if it was the guilt or the fear, but Rachel wasn't herself. She'd been so paranoid these last few months, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I sank into the couch, my head in my hands. And now he's dead. Convenient timing, don't you think? Ava's face went pale. You don't think? I don't know what to think, I said, cutting her off. But someone needs to tell me the whole truth. When I got back to the hospital that evening, I couldn't bring myself to go straight to Rachel's room. Instead, I tracked down the nurse who had handed me Rachel's medical records. Can I see her personal effects? I asked. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. We have them in a secure locker. I'll get them for you. She returned a few minutes later with a small bag. Inside was Rachel's phone, her wallet, and the jewelry she'd been wearing when she crashed. I opened the phone, relieved to find it wasn't locked. Rachel had always been terrible about setting passwords. I scrolled through her messages, her emails, her photos. At first, nothing stood out. Then I found a series of messages from an unknown number, all from the last month. The texts were relentless. You can't ignore me forever. Does Antonio know about us yet? Maybe I should tell him. You owe me. The last message was sent just hours before the accident. Meet me, or I'll make you regret it. My breath caught in my throat. Rachel hadn't just been hiding an affair, she'd been running from it. And now Adam was dead. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was darker than I could have imagined. The voicemail played over and over in my head. Adam's tone wasn't just angry, it was unhinged. He sounded like a man at the end of his rope, desperate and dangerous. Rachel must have known meeting him was a risk, but she went anyway. Why? I needed to talk to Ava again. She'd been holding back, I could feel it, and after finding that letter and hearing the voicemail, I was done playing games. I showed up at Ava's apartment unannounced, pounding on the door until she answered. She looked startled, her face puffy like she'd been crying again. Ava, I said sharply, pushing past her into the living room. We need to talk. Now. She closed the door, her movements slow, resigned. Antonio, I already told you I don't know. Cut the crap, I snapped, spinning to face her. I found a letter from Adam to Rachel. I heard his voicemail. I know she went to meet him the night of the accident. What I don't know is what happened next, and you're going to tell me everything. Ava's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't having it. Stop protecting her. I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. I get that she's your sister, but she's also my wife, and I deserve the truth. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I didn't want it to come to this, she whispered. Then tell me, I said, my voice softer now. Please. Ava took a shaky breath. Rachel didn't want to meet him, but she felt like she didn't have a choice. Adam had those videos, Antonio. He was threatening to send them to you, to post them online. She thought if she met him, she could convince him to stop. And what happened at that meeting? I pressed. Ava shook her head. I don't know. She didn't tell me much, just that she was scared and didn't know how to handle it. She called me after the accident, before she was found. Her voice was, I don't know, frantic. She said something about Adam, about how he wouldn't leave her alone, and then the line went dead. The line went dead. That meant Rachel had called Ava after leaving Adam. What did she say, exactly? I demanded. She said, Ava hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. She said it wasn't her fault. That Adam had pushed her too far, that she didn't mean for any of it to happen. Her words hit me like a brick. You think she hurt him? I don't know, Ava said quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. But she sounded terrified, Antonio. She kept saying she didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know what to do. I thought if she survived, she could explain everything. I left Ava's apartment with more questions than answers. Rachel's call to Ava painted a troubling picture, one where she wasn't just a victim but possibly a participant in whatever had happened to Adam. When I got back to the hospital, I went straight to Rachel's room. Her face was still, her body motionless except for the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. I sat beside her, staring at the woman I thought I knew. What did you do, Rachel? I whispered. My mind was spinning with possibilities. Had Adam attacked her, and she'd fought back? Had she gone there to beg him to stop, only for things to escalate? Or had she— No, I couldn't let myself go there. I reached for her phone again, scrolling through her messages, her call history, anything that might give me a clue. That's when I noticed a draft message, unsent. It was addressed to me. Antonio, there's so much I need to tell you, but I don't know where to start. I made mistakes, big ones, and I was scared of losing you. Adam, he wouldn't leave me alone. I thought I could fix it, but I was wrong. I don't know what's going to happen tonight, but if something does, I need you to know that I love you. I always have. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. She'd been trying to tell me, to warn me. But now it was too late, and I was left trying to piece together the wreckage she'd left behind. The unsent message from Rachel haunted me. She'd known something might happen that night, yet she'd gone to meet Adam anyway. It didn't answer the question swirling in my head, but it painted a picture of a woman trying to wrest control of her life back from a man who'd held it hostage. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the dark, Rachel's phone in one hand, my mind cycling through the possibilities. Had she gone to plead with Adam? To threaten him back? Or worse, to silence him? The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. Antonio, he said, his voice low. We got the preliminary toxicology report on Adam Sinclair. His system was clean, no drugs, no alcohol. I frowned. But the article said. They assumed it was an overdose, Mike interrupted. We found a bottle of pills at the scene, but he didn't take any. It was staged. Staged. My heart sank. Mike's voice was grim. We also found bruising on his neck. Signs of a struggle. Adam didn't overdose, he was strangled. I leaned against the wall, my knees threatening to give out. And Rachel. We can't rule out her involvement, Mike said carefully. But we're looking into other possibilities. Adam wasn't exactly a saint, Antonio. He had enemies, people he owed money to, people he crossed. It could have been anyone. I wanted to believe that, but Rachel's frantic call to Ava, her unsent message to me, it all pointed to her being there that night. Keep me updated, I muttered and hung up. At the hospital, I sat beside Rachel, staring at her as if she might wake up and explain everything. But all she did was lie there, pale and silent. I was lost in thought when the door creaked open. It was Beth, clutching her bag nervously. Beth, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? She looked uncomfortable but determined. I heard about Adam. And I thought you might need to know something. I gestured for her to sit, my stomach twisting with anticipation. What is it? Beth hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. Rachel gave this to me a few weeks ago. She said it was for safekeeping, in case something happened to her. What's on it? I asked, taking the drive from her. Beth shook her head. I don't know. She told me not to look, just to keep it safe. My heart pounded as I stared at the drive. Rachel had known she was in danger. She'd prepared for this. I thought about just giving it to the police, Beth admitted, but I figured you should see it first. Thank you, I said, my voice tight. I'll let you know if it's important. At home, I plugged the drive into my laptop, my hands trembling. It contained a single folder labeled, For Antonio. Inside were several videos, screenshots of text messages, and an audio recording. The first video made my stomach churn. It was footage of Rachel and Adam, intimate and raw. I stopped it after a few seconds, unable to stomach more. The text messages painted a picture of their toxic relationship. Adam was controlling, manipulative, and relentless. He demanded her time, her attention, her loyalty, even when she begged him to let her go. The audio recording was the hardest to listen to. It was Rachel's voice, shaky and desperate. Adam, I can't do this anymore, she said. I love Antonio. I made a mistake. Don't lie to me, Adam snarled. You don't get to walk away from me. I gave you everything, Rachel, and you're just going to throw it all away for him. It's over, Rachel said, her voice breaking. You need to move on. The recording ended abruptly, but it left no doubt in my mind. Rachel had tried to end things with Adam, and he hadn't taken it well. The drive provided answers, but it raised even more questions. If Rachel had been trying to escape Adam, had she killed him in self-defense? Or had she been pushed to her breaking point? And if Adam's death wasn't an accident, who else might have wanted him gone? One thing was clear: Rachel's secrets were far more dangerous than I'd imagined. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the evidence on the USB drive. The texts and audio were damning, but they painted Rachel as a woman backed into a corner, not a cold-blooded killer. Still, her role in Adam's death felt less like a mystery and more like a looming certainty. After hours of staring at my laptop, I decided to visit Mike again. He needed to see this. As much as it hurt, I couldn't keep it to myself. If Rachel was involved, the truth had to come out. Mike leaned back in his chair, listening as I laid everything out: the letter, the voicemail, the USB drive. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "That's a lot," he said, tapping his pen on the desk. "If what's on this drive is legit, it changes everything." "It's legit," I said firmly. "I've gone through it." Adam was harassing Rachel, threatening her. She was terrified of him. Mike nodded. "I'll have our tech team analyze it." "But Antonio," he leaned forward, his tone serious. "If Rachel was at Adam's house the night he died, this could go two ways. If she acted in self-defense, the evidence might back her up. But if it looks premeditated—" I swallowed hard. "I understand. I'll keep you updated," Mike promised. Back at the hospital, Rachel still hadn't shown any signs of waking up. I sat beside her, the weight of everything crushing me. "Ava told me about your call," I murmured, gripping her hand. "You said it wasn't your fault." "What did you mean, Rachel? Did you hurt him? Did you—" My voice broke, and I couldn't finish the question. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Beth again. "I remembered something," she said quickly when I answered. "Rachel told me Adam had something hidden in his house, a safe. She said it had evidence." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, my heart racing. "I don't know," Beth admitted. But she was terrified of it getting out. She thought it could destroy her. I couldn't ignore what Beth had said. If Adam had kept a safe, it might hold the missing piece to this puzzle. But I needed a way to access it without alerting the police just yet. The next morning, I called Ava. "Ava, do you know if Rachel ever mentioned Adam keeping a safe?" I asked. She hesitated. "She might have said something once." "Why?" "I think it could have answers," I said. "I need to get into his house again." "Antonio, that's a terrible idea," Ava said, panic creeping into her voice. "If the police catch you—" "I don't have a choice," I cut in. "Rachel's life is hanging in the balance here." Ava sighed. "Fine. I'll help. But you owe me for this." That evening, Ava and I drove to Adam's house. It was still marked off as a crime scene, but we waited until the street was quiet before slipping inside. The house felt even more sinister this time, the air thick with tension. We searched the office, the bedroom, even the basement, but found nothing. Then Ava called out from the living room. "Antonio, I think I found something." I hurried over to find her kneeling by the fireplace, where a hidden panel had been pried loose. Inside was a small safe. "How do we open it?" Ava asked. I spotted a notepad on the mantel with a faint imprint on the top sheet. Grabbing a pencil, I shaded over the marks, revealing a 4-digit code. Holding my breath, I entered it into the safe. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside were stacks of photos, a flash drive, and a journal. The photos made my stomach churn, intimate moments between Adam and Rachel, each one more damning than the last. Ava flipped through the journal, her face going pale. "Antonio," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." She handed it to me, and I skimmed the pages. Adam had detailed everything: his obsession with Rachel, their affair, his threats to expose her. The last entry was dated the night of his death. "She's coming tonight. I'll make her see she belongs with me. If not, she'll regret it." The words sent a chill down my spine. Adam had planned for that night to be a turning point. But Rachel had left alive, and he hadn't. What had happened between them? And would this journal help prove Rachel's innocence, or seal her fate? The journal felt like a loaded gun in my hands, each page painting Adam as a man spiraling out of control. His obsession with Rachel wasn't love, it was possession, pure and toxic. But it also confirmed one thing: Rachel had been there the night he died. As Ava and I drove away from Adam's house, the weight of what we'd found pressed down on us. I clutched the journal tightly, my mind racing. "What do we do now?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. I'm taking this to Mike, I said firmly. If this doesn't clear Rachel, at least it gives context to what she was dealing with. She wasn't the villain here. Do you really believe that? Ava asked, her tone cautious. I hesitated. Did I? Every piece of evidence pointed to Rachel acting out of desperation, but part of me couldn't ignore the possibility that she might have snapped under the pressure. I don't know, I admitted. But I need to believe she didn't mean for any of this to happen. When I handed the journal to Mike the next day, he read it in silence, his expression unreadable. This is big, he said finally. If this gets entered into evidence, it could change the direction of the investigation. But it doesn't prove Rachel didn't kill him, I pointed out. Mike nodded. No, but it paints a clearer picture of their relationship. If this goes to trial, her defense team could argue she acted in self-defense or under duress. I swallowed hard. Do you think she did it? Mike met my eyes. I think Rachel was pushed to her limit. Whether that means she killed him, I don't know yet. But this journal makes it clear Adam wasn't innocent. That evening, I sat by Rachel's bedside, staring at her motionless face. The journal had answered some questions, but the biggest one remained. What had happened in those final moments between her and Adam? I leaned closer, gripping her hand. Rachel, I whispered, my voice cracking. I need you to wake up. I need to hear your side of this. Please. The steady hum of the machines was her only reply. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my phone buzzing. It was Mike again. We got something, he said without preamble. What? I asked, sitting up. Our tech team cracked Adam's phone. There's a video from the night of his death. I think you need to see this. I met Mike at the station, my heart pounding as he led me into a small conference room. He pulled up the video on his laptop, then stepped back, giving me space to watch. The footage was shaky, filmed on Adam's phone. It showed him pacing in his living room, ranting at someone out of frame. You think you can just walk away, he yelled, his face twisted with anger. You think you can erase me like I'm nothing? Adam, please. Rachel's voice came from behind the camera, trembling. This isn't going to end well for either of us. Just let it go. I loved you. Adam shouted, stepping closer to the camera. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for him. There was a crash off screen, then the camera was dropped. The footage became chaotic, capturing flashes of movement, a struggle, heavy breathing, the sound of glass shattering. Then Adam's voice, weaker now, you don't get to. The video ended abruptly, cutting to black. I sat back, my hands shaking. That doesn't prove anything, I said, my voice hollow. Mike nodded grimly. No, but it confirms there was a confrontation. And it matches the injuries we found on Adam's body. What happens now? I asked, dread curling in my stomach. We'll use this as evidence, Mike said. But unless Rachel wakes up to give her side, it's all speculation. That night, I couldn't shake the image of Adam's face, twisted with rage, or the sound of Rachel's voice, pleading with him. She'd been scared, desperate, but had she gone too far? I sat in the hospital room, gripping Rachel's hand. If you're innocent, Rachel, I whispered, I need you to fight. Wake up and tell me the truth. Because if you don't, I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting for you. The hospital room felt heavier than ever that night. Rachel's lifeless form seemed to mock me, as if she knew the answers I needed but refused to give them. I sat slouched in the chair beside her, staring at her face. She looked peaceful, unbothered by the storm raging outside her fragile body. The video replayed in my mind on a loop, Adam's venomous words, the sounds of their struggle, and Rachel's trembling voice begging him to let go. My heart wanted to believe she hadn't intended for things to go this far, that she wasn't capable of such violence. But my head reminded me of the evidence piling up, each piece painting a Messier picture. Around midnight, I was startled out of my thoughts by a faint sound, a groan. I shot up, leaning over Rachel. Her fingers twitched, and her eyelids fluttered. My heart leapt to my throat. Rachel! I whispered, my voice shaking. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused and heavy, before slowly settling on me. It took a moment, but recognition finally sparked in her gaze. Antonio, she croaked, her voice weak and dry. Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed her hand. I'm here. You're okay. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned closer. Don't try to talk. Let me get the nurse. I pressed the call button, and within seconds, a flurry of activity surrounded us. Nurses checked her vitals, adjusted her IVs, and asked her simple questions to assess her cognitive state. I stood back, overwhelmed by relief and dread. Rachel was awake. And now, the truth was within reach. The next morning, Rachel was more alert, though still weak. I sat beside her bed, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I didn't know how to start, how to ask her the questions that had haunted me for days. "Antonio," she said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was raspy, like it hurt to speak. I looked up, my chest tightening. "I'm here." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." The words hit me like a freight train. They confirmed what I already knew. Rachel had done something she couldn't take back. "Rachel," I said gently, though my voice shook. "I need you to tell me what happened. With Adam. With everything." She hesitated, her gaze darting around the room like she was searching for an escape. "Please," I urged. "I know about the affair. I know about the videos, the threats. I just need to hear your side of it." Rachel's shoulders sagged, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "I just wanted it to stop." "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Rachel's story poured out in halting fragments. She admitted to the affair, her voice thick with shame. It had started as a mistake, a moment of weakness when she ran into Adam at a conference. He'd charmed her, reminded her of simpler times, and she'd fallen for it. But Adam's charm quickly turned to control. He became possessive, demanding more and more of her time, her attention. When she tried to end it, he threatened to expose everything, to destroy her life and mine. "I was scared," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "I thought if I could keep him calm, I could protect us." "Protect us?" I echoed bitterly. "Rachel, you were lying to me. You weren't protecting anyone." She flinched, but nodded. "I know. And I hate myself for it." Then she told me about the night of the accident. Adam had demanded she meet him, threatening to release the videos if she didn't. She'd gone, hoping to reason with him one last time. "I told him it was over," she said, her voice shaking. But he wouldn't listen. He grabbed me, started yelling, and then Her voice trailed off, and she stared at her hands. "What happened, Rachel?" I pressed. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. He wouldn't let go. I shoved him hard. He tripped, hit his head on the coffee table. "I didn't mean to, Antonio. I swear." My heart pounded in my chest. "And then?" "I panicked," she admitted. "I ran. I was driving too fast, and I lost control of the car. The next thing I knew, I was here." Her story left me reeling. She'd admitted to being there, to pushing Adam, but was it self-defense or something darker? And even if she hadn't meant to kill him, would the law see it that way? I sat there, staring at her, torn between anger, sorrow, and the smallest sliver of relief. The truth was finally out, but it came at a price. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. Rachel reached for my hand, her grip weak. "Say you'll forgive me," she pleaded. But I couldn't answer. Not yet. Rachel's confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I sat there, my mind racing through every word she'd said. Adam's death wasn't planned, at least not the way she told it. But did that make it any less damning? "Rachel," I said finally, pulling my hand away from hers. "Do you realize what you've done?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I know I made mistakes, horrible ones. But I didn't mean for him to die, Antonio. I swear." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to me when things with Adam got out of control?" "I was scared," she whispered. "Of him. Of losing you. Of everything." I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, and saw someone I barely recognized, fragile, desperate, and drowning in guilt. "I need time," I said, standing up. "To think. To figure out where we go from here." Her sobs followed me as I left the room, but I couldn't turn back. The truth was finally out, but it had left our marriage in pieces, and I didn't know if it could ever be put back together. Outside, I called Mike. "She admitted to being there," I said. "She said it was an accident, that he hit his head when she pushed him." Mike sighed on the other end. "That lines up with the evidence, but it's still her word against, well, nothing. Without witnesses, it's going to be a tough case. What happens now?" I asked. We'll present her story along with the physical evidence, Mike said. But Antonio, she's not off the hook. The DA might push for manslaughter charges. Manslaughter. The word made my chest tighten. Thanks, Mike, I muttered and hung up. I sat in my car, staring at the hospital's entrance. Rachel had told me the truth, but it felt like I was still standing on shaky ground. The road ahead was unclear, and I wasn't sure if I could walk it with her anymore. For now, all I could do was wait, for the investigation to play out, for the dust to settle, and for my heart to decide if it could forgive her. The next few days passed in a blur. Rachel remained under close observation, her body healing while her world unraveled. I visited her daily, though our conversations were short and strained. She'd said her piece, but the damage was done. Mike called me 2 days later with an update. The DA has decided to charge Rachel with involuntary manslaughter, he said bluntly. They believe there's enough evidence to suggest negligence, even if Adam's death wasn't premeditated. I sat silently, the words sinking in. What happens now? She'll be arrested once she's medically stable, Mike said. The court will likely grant bail, but she'll need a strong defense. Do you think she has a chance? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike hesitated. It depends on how the jury views her actions. If her lawyer can frame this as self-defense under duress, she might avoid prison. But it's not a guarantee. I walked into Rachel's hospital room that evening, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had to tell her. She looked up at me, her eyes tired but hopeful. What's wrong? She asked, sensing my unease. I took a deep breath. The DA is charging you with involuntary manslaughter. Her face went pale, her lips trembling. But I told you the truth. It was an accident. I know, I said gently, sitting beside her. But the law doesn't always see things the way we do. They think you were reckless, that you should have known meeting Adam was dangerous. Tears welled in her eyes. What do I do, Antonio? I hesitated. I wanted to say I'd stand by her, that we'd fight this together, but I wasn't sure if I could. The betrayal still burned too brightly, and my trust in her was shattered. You'll need a good lawyer, I said instead. We'll figure out the rest as we go. She nodded, but the look in her eyes told me she already felt abandoned. That night, I sat alone in the living room of our home, staring at the remnants of the life we'd built together. Photos of us smiling on vacations, framed memories of better times. They felt like artifacts from a life that no longer existed. Rachel was about to face the legal battle of her life, and I was left questioning whether I had the strength, or the will, to stand by her side.